Today I'd like to do a quick unboxing and review of the Gentle Giant Jumbo Vintage Kenner figure of Han Solo in Carbonite. That's kind of a long name, but I guess that makes sense. This is part of Gentle Giant's line, quite extensive line, of jumbo-size Kenner vintage Star Wars figures. So in other words, they are basically modeled after the original vintage Star Wars figures, but blown up to essentially 1/6 scale, so they're 12 inches tall, whereas the original figures were, of course, 3 3/4 inch tall. This one in particular, it's a Premier Guild gift for people who are part of the Premier Guild. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, you can sort of pay a certain amount for a year and get some discounts and things, but also you get a quote-unquote gift that is generally around the same amount that you're paying. So, you know, if you're going to be buying stuff anyway, it's not a bad deal. This one, as I say, is from last year, so I bought and paid for this like a year ago, and it's only just now coming in. But I was excited to hear that they were going to be releasing this one, because it's obviously an important piece for Jabba's palace. Now, I do have one small confession to make, and that is that I do not actually have the original vintage figure for this. I never had it as a kid. I don't have it now. And it's one of those figures that I've sort of been putting off for a long time, and it's just gotten more and more expensive over the years, and I'm not sure when I'm ever going to actually get one of these. Hopefully sometime. I don't mind, you know, if it's just loose, but I do want to have all the pieces with it if possible. So anyway, I can't show you the original figure in comparison with this, unfortunately, but we will take a look at it nonetheless. Now you can see here, this is in the same kind of clamshell packaging that all the other figures have been in. It is essentially a cardboard backing piece sandwiched in a clamshell like this, that you can open just by cutting a little bit of tape, and that allows you to open it and remove the figure without actually ripping it off the back of the card, as you used to have to do with the vintage figures, which is quite nice. I like that. There are some people who still don't want to open their jumbo figures, which I can sort of understand it on some level, but I think once you get to this point where you can take it out and put it back without causing any damage, I don't really see why you need to keep it in the package. Especially with this one here, you can't really see the figure very well without taking it out of the package, as you will see. One other thing to note is that this has been secured by 2 twisty ties here, which is kind of ugly, to be honest with you. And if I was a person who didn't want to open my figures, I'd be a little upset about that, because there's no way to get it out of there otherwise. Personally, I'm just going to be taking those out and probably putting the figure back for now anyway, at least until I have a full display of these loose. But yeah, it's something to consider. I assume they did that to protect it during shipment, which is certainly a laudable goal, but yeah, it looks kind of bad, to be honest with you. This is, of course, a 2-part figure. They've got the Carbonite chamber and the Han figure itself. In the packaging, he is sort of underneath the Carbonite chamber. So yeah, you can barely even tell that he's in there. Even though I don't have the original Han Solo figure that this is based on, I do have a carded vintage figure. I only have a handful of these, actually. I don't collect the carded figures, generally speaking, because I feel like they're just too expensive, and also they're gonna fall apart sooner or later, basically. But I do have this one, for example, so we can put that right there. And yeah, you can see that as a gigantic difference in size. It's also quite a difference in the overall layout. If you haven't noticed from the other ones of these that they've made, they made the backing card much smaller than it actually was with the original figures, because as you can see, this is the figure and this is the card. You know, if this was the same size relative to the card would be just gigantic. You know, it just would be too much, I think. So I can understand why they did that, but it is not exactly a faithful reproduction of the original figure. Also, speaking of not being faithful reproductions, you'll notice here on the card it says Gentle Giant Limited right there in the old Kenner font, and that is a change, I believe, just a recent change. It used to actually say Kenner on them, and they've changed that to Gentle Giant, and I don't know why. I mean, hopefully, I'm hoping that it was some kind of licensing problem or something like that, and not just an artistic choice, because it's a terrible choice. I don't know. You know, the whole point of these is nostalgia. So you want it to be as similar to the original as possible, and having Gentle Giant emblazoned on the front like that is not great. But in any case, I have this resting on a little piece of cardboard here, you may have noticed, because it does not quite want to stand up straight. That's one thing you may want to keep in mind when displaying this. But in any case, we can turn this around briefly, and you can see remnants of some packing peanuts that they packed it in. Now this is the full lineup of jumbo figures, I guess, maybe including a few that are not quite released. I'm not sure. Well, like Jedi Luke is not out yet, I guess. But a very impressive selection, 52 of them. Now, the one that I'm most concerned about is, of course, Jabba the Hutt, which they released, rather announced, quite some time ago. And we haven't heard much from them about it since then. I did sort of get a short response from someone, a representative on the forums, saying that they are still planning to do it, but goodness knows when it will actually be coming out. I'm a little worried that they might decide to not do the throne, for example, or that it might be extremely expensive, or that they might just cancel it altogether. And that would be a shame, because I really want to set up a display of all of these figures. Well, not all, I don't have all of these figures, but the Java related ones. I think it would be just really nice looking if you could have Java surrounded by all of the relevant figures. Speaking of which, we need figures like Bib Fortuna, for example, and some of the other Palace aliens would be great to have as well. But moving right along, let's go ahead and open this up. As I say, you can open it without damaging anything by just sort of cutting some tape along here, and it just sort of slides open. So we'll go ahead and do that and see what it looks like inside. So here we have Han out of his packaging, but not yet out of the carbon freeze chamber. We'll go ahead and do that now. And one thing I noticed was that they have him in a tray here and sort of covered in saran wrap. It's not really shrink wrap because it's just loosely on there, but it's presumably to protect his paint from rubbing up against the chamber itself. So I'll get rid of that. And here is the figure. So I thought we'd take a look at both parts of the figure, or both figures, I guess you could say, in some sense, and compare them to the original vintage figure. Now, as I said, I don't have one of those actually at hand, but I do have photos of them that I can use to compare them. One note before we go any further: this carbon block is quite lightweight and will not stand up on its own unless you have something weighting it down inside, like the figure itself, the Han figure, or I put the coin behind it, which we'll look at later, just to make sure it didn't fall over, but that's something to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and look at Han first. You can see that he has no neck, and that is accurate to the vintage figure, more or less. That's one reason I think why I never really liked this figure. It's just not the most attractive version of Han by any means. But I think even compared to the original vintage figure, it looks a little bit off somehow. If you look at his thigh area, sort of the crotch area there, it seems like there's a big gap that didn't exist, at least in the photos that I've seen of the vintage figure. His legs seem kind of scrawnier than they did on the actual vintage figure. I will say that there's no real issues with the paint, although it is, as far as I can tell, completely, well, let's see, let me get a closer look here. I was going to say it's entirely painted. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, but his face and hair do appear to be painted. I believe the vintage figure had the face in sort of a flesh-colored plastic as opposed to that. So it does have a bit of a different look than the original figure did. Now if we want to look at the block itself, that is not made of translucent plastic as I thought it would be, and as I believe the vintage version was. This is in fact a transparent plastic that has been coated on the inside with some kind of a, well, I don't know if it's a paint or something. It's been sort of airbrushed inside here. You can see it's because it's kind of unevenly applied a little bit. It's also at the bottom here. I don't know if you can tell, but it's kind of pooled a little bit where it would have just sort of fallen by gravity. There's also like one spot here, which may be difficult to see, but it has been wiped off. There it is. So that's a little disappointing. Also, this is pretty lightweight. This feels not much heavier than, say, the the tray that this figure came in. Which, for the price of these figures, you'd think that they could I have to put the coin behind there. You'd think that they could make it a little bit more heavy-duty. So that's a little bit disappointing. Also, I just from looking at pictures of the original Carbonite block from the vintage figure, it looks to me like the part where his face and body and everything come through is less opaque or more transparent, whereas here it's all just sort of a uniform coating, right? So it's all the same amount of transparency, which means that when you put him behind there, I guess we can go ahead and do that. It's a little hard to reach. I have to be pretty far away from these because of their size to get them on camera. But yeah, if we put him in here, you really can't see it, right? You can't see anything but the silhouette, and if I didn't have a white background behind it, you wouldn't be able to see that either. So, yeah, honestly, it's a little bit disappointing in that sense. One other thing to note is the coin. It says Han Solo Carbon Freeze, has Han on the front there, and then on the back has a description, which is a little hard to read because of the reflective nature of this thing, but it says, smuggler captured by the bounty hunter Boba Fett and frozen because he owed money to the evil Jabba the Hutt. Now, one thing I noticed right away is that they have joined up because he owed money almost as if it was all one word. And the original vintage coin, as far as I can tell, did in fact have spaces between there. So that's a bit of an unusual mistake to make, a little bit disappointing as well. Overall, I can't say that I'm completely satisfied with this figure, given the kind of flimsy and poorly made Carbonite block and the sort of questionable likeness to the original vintage figure. Yeah, I would say this is sort of mediocre, but if you want this figure, this character, you don't have a lot of other options. So, I mean, I'm definitely glad to have him in my collection and hope to have him displayed along with the vintage Jumbo Jabba whenever that does come out. So, thanks very much for watching.